joining Europeans and other, as we continually have more and more people from joining around the world. Thank you for jumping on. And if you're streaming this online, hi. Or if you're just watching the playback, hi in the future. We're going to get started here in 1 minute. We'll just let a few more people join. And as we go through this, guys, there will be the ability to throw questions in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question. We're going to run this a bit more interactively than we normally do. And we've got 30 minutes. So it's going to be 30 minutes of pure awesomeness. We'll give it 1 more minute and then we'll get started.
We're just going to ask that everyone stays muted during this. So if you have any questions, just put them in the meeting chat and we'll definitely answer you as we go.
Okay, I think we'll get into it now. Well, welcome everybody. We're really excited about this feature set that we're going to do a deep dive on today. Giraffe continues to just grow in its powerfulness, and this advancement we've made into generative design is very significant. So Rob Asher, our CEO, is going to take us through the deep detail of how Flow Builder works, why we built it, and what kind of power it can give you, order of magnitude it can drive from your workflows. So just to lay out a little bit of an agenda, we're going to start with a very quick feature highlight and some things that we've snuck into the product since our major release in January. And Holly and I will be taking you through that. You've probably met Holly. Holly's our head of customer success and loves to send out emails and get people onboarded. And then I am James Blackwood, and we may or may not have had a chance to meet. Then we're going to have Rob take us through the Flow Builder, as I mentioned. And if you all were monitoring your emails over the last month, you've probably been getting emails about the design competition that we ran for the Flow Builder. So the Flow Builder unlocks these generative workflows, and we threw the challenge out to the community to see who could come up with the most creative, imaginative use of the Flow Builder. And we have a winner, and we're very excited to share that winner at the end of the call. So stay tuned right to the end. We'll be super efficient, and we'll share with you who's won that competition. So with that, let's crack on. The 3 features that we're going to talk through this morning, just a very quick overview, it will take no less than 5 minutes, is 3D portfolio. So Holly's going to show us that and talk to that. We added the ability to do geometry filters on lens. We'll do a very small recap of lens and share with you why the geometry filter is so cool. And then lastly, my pet hobby is visual analytics, and the dev team have done an awesome job incorporating some beautiful graphics into the analytics pane. And so we're going to cover those 3 things in the next 5 minutes. So Holly, why don't you start with 3D portfolio?
Yeah, thanks, James. We are so excited to show you the newest way to visualize your portfolio of projects. Now, enterprise customers can turn on features in Lens, and this displays all of the geometry from all of your projects on the map. Here we're featuring the ACOM Hunt Tishman workspace, and this is visualizing all of their projects in Los Angeles. The fidelity of these projects in the portfolio layer is just awesome, isn't it, James?
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's so great to, with basically a couple of clicks, be able to just visualize your entire portfolio all in context.
That's it. And you may notice if you've been using the portfolio lens feature, just to show you where that hides, is we come up here to these 3 dots, we click activate lens on your portfolio layer, and you can style the way that your portfolio is presented on the map. So historically, we would just have had circle, fill, 3D, and none. And now what Holly's sharing is the release of this ability to see the individual features of those projects. So if I turn that off, we just look at fill. Well, it's deciding that it wants to stay on. But we can now add features, and instead of just styling the polygon of the boundary of that project. And just to show you how these things stack together, AECOM Tishman Hunt have an awesome data set here with their 3D portfolio, but they've also got things like who is the architect for those projects. And just like you would historically on Lens, I can now add that field to my label, and where we have it, we can now also see who the architect is on these projects. So we have AECOM Hunt's permission to share this data. Obviously, we would never share client data without their permission, but it's a great use of the portfolio feature, and so we wanted to show that to you. Anything else, Holly?
No, that's it. You definitely covered it.
Awesome. Well, the next feature we want to highlight is in the vein of Lens as well. So let's have a quick look on a different project, but also in LA, how we can use geometry filters now to exclude vector work within a particular area. So if you've used Giraffe a lot, you'll know that this 3D building layer is awesome, but it often gets in the way of what you're trying to achieve on your project. And we used to have an app called Context, which would exclude the 3D buildings in your site. But sometimes you want to keep one, or you want to exclude buildings further around your site. So the creative devs put together a beautiful feature called Geometry Filter. So I'm going to just bring up the, well, first of all, I'm going to hit refresh because I think I've got a little too many tabs open. And I'm going to add a filter to that 3D buildings layer in the Lens tool. So we'll go 3D buildings, open Lens controls. First, we'll hit style, and we'll just make sure all the buildings are white. So we'll get rid of this. If I wanted to add a color based on a particular field, I could, but I'll just make them gray so we can actually see them. And then we can go down to the geometry filter, and we can specify exactly the boundary of the project that we want to exclude or include. We can do it sort of inverse, or exclude or include. So I've lost my 3D buildings here. Holly, can you see what I'm doing wrong? Have I done something silly?
No, I think it might just be you have too many tabs open, like you said.
Right. So we can see there, we've got 3D buildings with Lens control. It actually has worked, but you see where it's clipping on the edges is where it's overlapping. So I'm just not getting that immediate feedback, which I think is a memory issue. So let's go back and edit that boundary. And as I move that boundary out, and then I can close the Lens down, then you'll see now it's excluding that whole polygon. So obviously having that live feedback is really nice, but even without it, we've now excluded our geometries from the boundary. So that's the second feature we want to highlight, just being able to exclude, and maybe just to do the opposite, just for a bit of fun. I'm just going to open that back up again and say, instead of exclude, let's make it include. Drop that back down. And now we should see just the 3D buildings on the site. And that's giving me a bit of grief as well. So let's not mess around with that anymore. The third feature we wanted to showcase is the ability to add visual analytics onto your analytics workflows. So this is a pro forma that we have open, and you can see I've got this beautiful pie chart here, which looks really nice and is giving us a little title of the breakdown of costs. And as I hover over each of these things, it's showing me which costs relate to which part of the pie graph. And then obviously it's showing me this total as well. So let's just open up costs and see how we did that. So you could see now when we go and edit a category, we've got this category displays, and we can add one. And we can actually jump in there and say, you know what, we want to add a pie chart as well. But this time I want you to exclude the developer fee for whatever reason. Perhaps this is something we're going to send to a client. And we will show the percentages of total as well. And so now as I hit save, I've actually got a second visualization that's coming up here live. So very cool thing, particularly when you're trying to show your customers or your clients exactly what's going on, and make it really attractive as opposed to just long lists of line items. So with that, I might stop showing you features and hand over to Rob, who's going to take us through the deep dive of the Flow Builder, the reason that we're all here together.
Awesome, thanks Jimbo. Hopefully you guys can hear me and also see my screen.
Yep, we've got it.
Great. Okay, so I've pulled up the Metro Map by Aerometrics, which is high res aerial imagery, which always makes Giraffe look incredible. And what I thought I'd do is I'd do a master plan here in Sydney. This is one of the areas of brownfield regeneration in Sydney. And like all brownfield regeneration basically around the world, it's hard and complicated, because if a site was easy, it has been done already in mature cities. And it's a big site, former industrial site. You can see it looks like it's being used as a sort of building supplies depot. So what I'll do is I'll do a quick master plan, and I'll start off using the basic generative features or the flow features, and then I'll customize something so you can really understand the benefits and why we've designed flow the way we have, and see actually the mechanics of the flow builder itself. All right, so the reason Giraffe Flow is very semi-automated. It's not it doesn't take the approach which is quite common to take of, I'm just going to refresh so that thing renders. Doesn't take the approach that you select the site and the AI breaks the site up and automatically goes all the way. Like, that's a cool approach and it's useful. But background as an architect and understanding how you move a deal forward means that we think that narrative and principles are critical. And so our flow builder is built to support that. So I'm going to, here draw what I think is absolutely critical in this site, which is its relationship to the water. And I'm going to demonstrate that by highlighting the water. And then I may do the same thing and draw and start dividing up the site. So let's bisect it, because if the site is 330, it's probably too wide. So let's connect this road and the water and create two more sort of walkable, interesting block sizes. And I'll put an arrow there initially. And then I can jump in and grab a flow, right? And I'm going to do an avenue with a cycle path as my first main flow. And you can see that the driving geometry, the red polyline, is just like a polyline, but as I'm moving it, what I'm getting is a whole bunch of additional geometry, and which is great. It means I'm getting more bang for my buck, right? And similar with apartments. If I draw an apartment like this, I have a single driving polyline in this instance as well. And what Flow's doing is it's taking that input and it's creating a whole bunch of geometries. And in this instance, the geometries are little rectangles that represent apartments defined in the flow. And I'll get to that in a second, but I just thought I'd make this master plan look good first, just to drive home how nice it is to work in Flow. As in, I'm telling a story here. I'm thinking about first principles and how we unlock this site and how we orient it to the water and make it beautiful and nice from a human perspective, considering human beings are going to be living in it. And Flow is kind of supporting me the entire way. There's nothing that I'm doing where Flow is preventing me from moving something in a certain direction. I can be, as silly or as sensible as I like, and Flow just sort of works alongside me. And that is how Flow is designed to work. So let's finish this off. I'll copy paste this apartment block, put a central courtyard over here. I don't get trees because I'm often in the dev branch of Giraffe and it proxies away my trees, which is sad. But you can see the park over there. And Flow is very, very tightly integrated with analytics. And one of the little things that ships in the Giraffe analytics is a geometry count, which is just counting up all the geometries. And so we've created 95 geometries out of 7. So these 7 geometries that I've drawn are generating 95 subgeometries. And the rest of the Giraffe analytics is working as you would expect. So counting things, measuring areas, driven by uses. So all the normal, like if you understand the normal giraffe, you understand Flow. Okay, so this is how Flow can be used and how it assists designers, who are using principles, site analysis, narrative to try and understand a site and build beautiful and responsive designs. So now let's get into what's going on behind the scenes. And to start off with, I'm going to take you through this very simple flow, which is this avenue and this cycle path. And then we'll build one together. So to edit the flow, there's actually 2 ways. The first is to open the Flow Builder. And here you see what's called a functional block diagram. And it's called that because it's a diagram with blocks in it. And each of these blocks represents a function, right? Or a transform. So, thinking back to, I don't know, year 10 maths, like f of x function, each of these is like that. So the offset line function takes a line and offsets it a distance. And to edit the parameters of the function, you have to click on the block. So the offset line function requires a distance. It requires an offset direction, which can be left or right. And the distance is obviously a numerical input. Then that functional block takes the input, does the function, does the transform, does the operation, and outputs something. In this instance, it takes in a line, it offsets, and it outputs a line. Array is a different function. It takes in a line, and then at a specified spacing, it creates a point. So it takes in a line, and it creates points. And again, the parameters of this function, what the spacing of the points are, is there an offset at the start? Do we rotate or randomize scale? All affect how this input line is transformed into points. And so what's really nice about this is you can see the map of what's going on. So we have that base feature, which is the red geometry that I created in Giraffe. We offset it, we array it, and we make each of those points a tree. The green blocks are usages. So you can select like a tree or whatever, right? In this instance, it has to be an object like a tree or a GLTF because it's a point. So we offset to the left, we offset to the right. I better offset that to the right. We keep the original feature without changing it and just transform it into a road. And then we offset the original feature again, round the corners, offset the polygon. So we've offset this line, offset into a polygon, and then apply the usage cycle path. And with all of that done, you can see what's happening. So we've got the original feature, which is in red. We've got offset to the right and divided into trees, which are the green dots to the right and the left. The original feature is turned into a road and also the cycle path. So this is how we go from a small number of geometries to a large number of geometries, because what Flow Builder is doing is taking the input feature and through a variety of functions, it's creating multiple output features. And when a designer or when you're thinking about how to unlock a site, often you need to be tweaking those parameters, right? And opening this Flow Builder, covering the screen, clicking on that and tweaking this is not very intuitive. It doesn't, okay, I've made it narrow, but I've kind of lost track. And so there's a different version of the same flow. And it works like this. These generated features, which correspond to these green outputs. So we've got two rows of trees. We've got a road and we've got a cycle path. We've got 4 output features are represented here in the generated features. So 2 trees, the road and the cycle path. And if we want to modify the cycle path, we click on it. And what Giraffe does is it shows all of the functions that have gone from the original input feature. So that's that red polyline, all the steps that it has gone through in order to finally arrive at cycle path. And so the first thing that we do to create this cycle path like I explained earlier, is we offset the polyline. And so if I drop that offset, I'm able to edit the parameters of that function, right? These are the functional blocks isolated to the one path. So rather than showing all of the paths, it's just the one path that connects the original line to the output feature, which is cycle path. And here I can edit the features kind of in real time. So that first step, which is offsetting a line, determines how far away the center of the cycle path is from the center of the road, which is this red line. So let's bring it closer. Next, we round the corners, which doesn't have much of an impact given that this road is pretty straight. Next, we offset the polygon. This determines offset the line. We offset the offset line. This time we offset it into a polygon. This determines the width of the cycle path. So if I make that extremely large, you'll see an extremely large cycle path. And if I make it 1.2 meters, it'll offset 1.2 meters in either direction. And finally, I have the output. The output is a usage cycle path. And at this point, it's just like a giraffe geometry. So I can add whatever property I want. In the normal way, you would add properties to any giraffe entity. So I'm going to change the color of that cycle path to green by adding a color property. Okay, so hopefully that was relatively straightforward. Let's go from scratch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a building with a very simple facade. So let's create a rectangle, an unattributed rectangle, and jump straight into the Flow Builder. Now, the first time you open the Flow Builder, it asks you to choose a function, right? And I'm going to choose offset line and then get in there again. Okay, so these functional blocks, you can choose the function. There's this many at the moment. We're hoping eventually to have a lot more. If anyone has used anything like Grasshopper or Dynamo, or even tools like Zapier, even bits of HubSpot, or Salesforce, this is familiar. There's no simple way to learn all these functions. You just have to learn them, but they're analogous to, or we're hoping they're as sensible as they can be. All right, so offset this line. Now I'm going to offset it a small amount, 0.2, and I'm going to offset it to the left and the right. Notice as I change this, the blocks actually give me a live preview, which is super useful because in this instance, I want to offset it outside of the building, right? And so I choose to the left, and then I'm going to bring it back in. So it's only 0.2 meters. And notice I'm using the scrub. I'm sure my mouse is lagging a bit, but hopefully you can see that. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use another function, which is probably my favorite function, which is called stroke dash. And what stroke dash does is it takes a line and it converts it into two parts, strokes and dashes. So the strokes are those and the dashes are the gaps, right? If you imagine a dashed line. Right? In this instance, I'm going to represent the windows with the stroke, and I'm going to represent the mullions, or the little elements between the windows, the window frames, with the dash. So I'm going to set the strokes to 4, and then I'm going to add another space, and I'm going to call this 0.1. Okay, and you can see now my strokes are almost all of it, and very difficult for even me to see, but there are actually minute dashes in there, little specks. So to pull the output of this function, right? This function outputs the strokes and the dashes. If there's no block, if we don't want that output to be rendered, we just leave that blank. But if we do want it, then we just click this fork button, and that's going to add it. Now we need to add one more function, which is we're going to offset these dashes to create little tiny polygons. So I'm going to assign the offset poly function, and I'm going to go 0.2. And now you can see these little polygons over here. Now I'm just going to apply, as a placeholder, I'm going to apply the commercial use to this. And I'm going to get rid of the strokes. The windows I'm going to leave blank. All right. Now, before, this is dangerous. I should click save and come back in. Always be saving, because it's, with this kind of thing, if it collapses, you lose a lot of work. All right, you can see what I've created. I've created mullions, window frames, but I have no building. So let's create the building now. And this line, offset, then stroke, then offset. If we click on the output, which is commercial, offset, then stroke, then offset. So these are two pictures of this flow. Before I jump in, I'm going to clone that commercial use case, the commercial usage, and I'm going to create a mullion usage. And I'm going to make it a dark color, and I'm going to make the line color a dark color. And I could set the efficiency to 0 and 0, so we just make sure that we don't measure areas of this thing. And then I'm going to jump back into the Flow Builder to finish off. All right, so these mullions, I'm not going to represent them as commercial. I'm going to represent them as mullion. And now I'm going to pull out the original feature, and I'm going to just make it commercial. And for the graphics, for the beauty, I'm going to add a property, and this is a special giraffe property called no facades. And when that property is active, there are no facades. And so you can see what we've achieved here, right? We've got the mullion use, which is these mullions here, and we've got the commercial sitting inside of it. It was important for us to offset the mullions so that they didn't clash. And what we've done is we've built a little generative visualization of a commercial building, which is really cool. And now because we're using a commercial use case here, we're still getting commercial areas accurately calculated. There is no roof rendered because we only count the areas of the floors. So we could use Flow to add a roof. But this is potentially far more useful as a visualization. What's really interesting about this is we could, using analytics now, actually calculate the lineal meters of mullion that we had to order sort of as a QS exercise. And notice that once we've hooked this thing up, we can reparameterize it. So we can go back into the history and say, that stroke dash where we set 4 and 1, maybe that's too much. Maybe let's get these windows nice and skinny, like even a 1.2 meter window. You know, that building has a completely different character and a different feel. And of course, we could override things like color. We could override widths and all of the parameters. So just look at this on mullion, and then I think I'll wrap or open for questions. The number of parameters in this little model that we've built is enormous. You know, there's 4 there and a bunch there and a bunch there, and that's excluding the parameters that we've added to the mullion and the properties we've added to the mullion. So what I'm showing you here is really quite complicated. You're wrestling, if you're using Flow, you're wrestling many, many parameters. If we open the Flow build, if we look at the parameters on the apartment function, there's you know, a silly amount. And if any of you have used the subdivision tool, that function as well has a large number of parameters. So it's not a simple thing to get your head around. It is an effort. But hopefully I've shown you here that once you get it, it is a really nice way of managing this information and these assumptions, because you can tie them together. You can look at them in this way. You can look at them in the latter way. You can control them with the usage, and they do behave predictably. And the final thing is flows sit on geometries. So if I was to copy and paste this guy and drag him over here, I can change this flow. So I could change the stroke dash of these windows. Let's make them really big without changing that. So we're actually looking at 2 flows operating on these geometries. So in things like Grasshopper and Rhino, Grasshopper, there's one flow diagram for the whole file. Giraffe works slightly differently, where there's a flow for every geometry. I'll stop there and open, or you know, if there's any questions, I'd love to have them.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. Thank you very much. That was awesome. If you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll take you off mute and you can ask it in front of the audience. Or you can throw it in the chat if you want to stay in incognito mode. We are happy to do that as well. Brad is asking a question: apartment flows fall off of stacked geometries? Question mark. And I imagine
Correct.
this,
So
yeah.
you can see that. So the outputs of the flows are giraffe geometries, and then they just get the normal giraffe flow. So it's as though you drew these by hand. And if you did draw these by hand, they would stack like this. To probably worth us actually adding a parameter. Yeah, well, a parameter to say, like, keep them all at the same height. But yes, in this instance, what we could add is the base height parameter to shoot this whole thing up to whatever height you wanted. And obviously, if that base height is lower than the building underneath, you'll still get the same effect. But for managing situations like that, you can use base height.
Andrew Chung is asking, how do you define where fire stairs are?
Great question, Andrew. So in an apartment flow, you hit Shift A and you enter this kind of graphical mode. Say I wanted a fire stair over here. I'm going to hold my Option key. I think it's the Alt key on a Windows machine, and I'm just going to drag another line, and then I'm going to make it very small, and it's going to jump around a bit, and I'll drag it back to where I want it. And you can see now it's been assigned the usage core, which is this dark brown, because it's smaller than the smallest unit in the apartment. So the smallest unit we have in our apartment parameters is 50, and that one was smaller, and so it's 25. So it's been assigned core, and it's over there. I will, make another core over here. Say, is a bit jumpy. Working on it. There we go. So now I've got a core on the one side and a fire stair on the other. And what I've done is I've just made one of the apartments small enough.
Any other questions, team? Well, we're 4 minutes over time, so without any other questions, I might jump straight to the winner of our Flow Builder competition. So, Rob, I'm going to wrestle the screen back off you.
Yes, please.
And this was a really fun competition to do. We weren't sure what we would get back, and we have to give a huge congratulations to our winner, who is Jonathan Gray from Monteith Powers. And Jonathan, we think, should become the next major developer in Australia with this visionary plan to build a turtle-shaped island off of Newcastle. And this thing is just so awesome. Like, if you're a fan of Australia, then this is going to be just the most incredible place to live out here off the edge of Newcastle. So if we dive in and have a look, part of why we chose this to be the winner is because obviously it's an incredibly creative, imaginative group of islands out here in the middle of the Pacific. But also, if you see, there's just an enormous amount of the use of the Flow Builder, and that was the real challenge. We've got subdivision here with these cool creative edges on them. You can see the subdivision wrapping and then having exclusions. And I clicked on the Mapbox link there. Then there's stacked subdivisions with multiple outputs over here. Use of the apartment Flow Builder, even got a 3D geometry in there. I mean, it's just an amazing use of the Flow Builder. So we may make this publicly available for people to have a look at, if that's okay with Jonathan from Monteith Powers. And yeah, well done, mate. We'll be sending you your priceless piece of merch in the mail. And we're very proud. I mean, it really tickled us to see something as cool and creative as this come through. So well done. And thank you for everyone who submitted. And congratulations, Jonathan and Monteith Powers. All right, with that, we'll let you go. Enjoy your Thursday, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks all. Bye.